Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I got an email not long ago from a United States Marine. I was actually in the Navy for 8 years, which, by the way, stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself. But this guy was in the Marine Corps, so I knew he wasn't a sissy. But he wasn't writing me actually as a tough guy. He was writing me as a distraught father. He said, my daughter was the top Christian student in her high school class. She won several scholarships from Christian organizations that she could take to any college she wanted to. And she wanted to take them to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to win the campus for Christ. Very liberal school. It's about 3 hours from where I live in Charlotte. I just spoke there in October. Very liberal school. So he said, we wanted to send her off there. And so we did. And about 4 weeks into her first semester, I got a phone call from her. Her words devastated me. She said, Dad, I don't believe in God anymore. Don't believe in God anymore? What? What happened? And she said, well, I've got this atheist college professor who teaches the New Testament class here at Chapel Hill. Yeah, the atheists teach the religion classes there. And he said, we don't even know who wrote the Gospels, and the Bible has errors in it, so, Dad, I'm an atheist now. Now, question, ladies and gentlemen. Do you think this young woman, in only 4 weeks, investigated all the evidence for and against Christianity and made a rational decision it was false? No, you couldn't do that in 4 weeks. So what happened? She went off to the college unarmed. She had no evidence that Christianity was true. We was never taught any evidence. And she went to college and heard what she thought were a couple of good arguments against Christianity, and so she left it. What's the easiest way to get picked off in a war? It's not knowing you're in one. That's how you get picked off in a war. And we are in a war for the hearts and minds not only of our young people, but from everybody. The culture is hostile to Christianity, particularly on a college campus. Not to the extent of the persecution we see overseas, but it is hostile to Christianity. We haven't done for our young people what 1 Peter 3:15 tells us to do. Always be ready to give an answer for the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Now, the gentleness and respect thing is hard for me because I'm originally from New Jersey. Okay? But we're supposed to give a reason. What's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Christians don't get brownie points for being stupid. We're supposed to know what we believe and why we believe it. And you know what? It's not all that difficult to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions in the affirmative to show that Christianity is true. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now, that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah, that is actually from, not as good as the music you just played, but it's grooving, right? That's from our TV show every Wednesday nights on DirecTV, channel 378. How many people have DirecTV? Can you see your hands, please? DirecTV. 3 of us! Come on, friends. Friends don't let friends watch cable. If you want to get on and have enough faith to be an atheist, you got to get DirecTV. Actually, that's not true. Do you have Roku? You guys ever heard of Roku? It's kind of like Apple TV. It's kind of a box you get. It's the NRB network, NRB. If you don't have either of those, you can watch it live on our website, crossexamined.org, at those times. We're also on radio every Saturday morning, a number of stations around the country. I don't know if it's on here in this area, but if not, it's over the internet live. It's also podcasted, and it's on our app, which I'll tell you about later. And what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. Well, first question, does truth exist? If there is no truth, if it's just true for you but not for me, or all truth is relative, as we hear in our relativistic culture, then quite obviously the Bible can't be true. Of course, if there is no truth, then any book written by an atheist can't be true either. right? We're going to deal with that question briefly here first. Second question, does God exist? You can't have a word from God if there is no God. If there's no God, throw the Bible away and every other book that talks about God. But I hope to show you here this morning that there really is a God. What do I mean by God? A spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things to this very second. We're going to briefly look at three arguments for that. Third question is, are miracles possible? Obviously, the Bible can't be true if miracles are not possible. But I hope to show you today that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and we have scientific evidence for it. Then and only then can we get to the key question, is the New Testament true? Now, the New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we can see if we have an accurate, historically reliable account of miracles occurring to Jesus and his apostles, as recorded in the 27 handwritten Greek manuscripts we put under one binding we now call the New Testament. Do these documents here tell us the truth, or were they written down much later by religious zealots who embellished it, who made it up? In fact, we're going to cover that tonight. This morning, we're just going to cover point 1 and some of point 2, and then tonight, if you can come back, we'll cover the rest. And even tonight, we're not going to have enough time to really cover this material in detail. So if you want to go further, the book is available on the book table, as well as a 12-part DVD series that goes through all this material. It's over 7 hours long. You can get workbooks, curriculum, if you really want to go through this. There's also a new book on the table called Stealing from God. Ladies and gentlemen, this book is not about tithing, okay? Is Stealing from God about tithing? No, not that there's anything wrong with tithing. The subtitle is Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. I've noticed whenever atheists open their mouths to make arguments against God, they're actually stealing aspects of reality that wouldn't exist unless God existed. So while they're arguing against God, their very arguments assume he does exist. In effect, they have to sit in God's lap to slap his face. That's what that's about. Now, if you don't want to get a book, that's fine. I want to send you this PowerPoint presentation here that I'm showing this morning and tonight, and actually many slides I can't show you. I'm going to send it to you in a PDF form if you're interested. Go to crossexamine.org/CP. You've got to type that in your browser. CP stands for college prep. We do a lot of college programs. And if you send me your email address, I'm going to send you this PowerPoint presentation in a PDF form, because you're not going to be able to keep up with me because I move very quickly. As I say, I'm from Jersey, so I speak at 150 words a minute with gusts to 350. All right? And if you're from the South, you cannot listen in Southern. We're going to move really quickly. Now, by the way, all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? Just so you know, I've got 3 sons, so I need some help. Actually, they're grown now. They're out of the house. In fact, the oldest 2, when they were about to go to college, they said, "Hey, Dad, we're interested in going into the military. What branch should we go into?" I said, "Well, look, if you want to fight, go Navy. Because wherever there's a problem in the world, we just pull our aircraft carrier up and we take care of the problem. We don't have to ask for permission to use your runway or any of that. But if you want a nice life, go Air Force." So they went Air Force. The oldest son is an intelligence officer in the Air Force, and the second son is a KC-10 pilot. A KC-10 is a big plane that refuels other planes. So what we say about our middle son, Spencer, is we say what Spencer does every day is he flies up to 30,000 feet, he sits around, and he passes gas. And he gets paid for it. Every man's dream. If I got paid for passing gas, I'd be a multimillionaire right now. The third son is not in the military, but he is out of the house. He's an engineer in Birmingham, Alabama. We live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So my wife and I, for the past 2 years, have been empty nesters. Took us a while to get used to that. About 10 minutes. That's how long it took to change the locks. Do we have any empty nesters in here? You notice how clean the house stays when they're gone? I mean, it's incredible. We love our kids, but they're messy. Anyway, there's a lot more on our website, crossexamine.org. And by the way, if you can come back tonight, as I say, we're going to cover points 1 and 2, just kind of summarize them, and then we'll review those tonight, and then covers points 3 and 4, and then hopefully take your questions tonight. So we'll have time for Q&A. You can ask whatever you want. I don't know if I'll have an answer, but you can ask, all right? But we got to start right here at point 1. Does truth exist? You guys ready to go? All right. Whenever you talk about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, "Colonel, I want the truth." And Nicholson said, Ken, that was better than the first service. But it wasn't really up to par. Let's try that again. "Colonel, I want the truth." Much better, much better. You know, there's a lot of people out there who can't handle the truth. They're saying, "You got your truth, I got my truth, there is no truth, all truth is relative." You've heard these claims, right? This relativistic culture that we live in. Well, let me ask you a question. If someone were to ever say to you, "There is no truth," what question would you ask them? Yeah, if somebody says there is no truth, you say, "Is that true? Is it true that there is no truth?" Because if it's true that there is no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Can you see this as a self-defeating statement? It doesn't meet its own standard. What's a self-defeating statement? Like, I can't speak a word in English. If I were to say that, you'd say, "Hey, you just said that in English." Right? It doesn't meet its own standard. Or, "My parents had no kids that lived." Right? That would be self-defeating. Or, "My brother is an only child." You go, what? Or, "Everything I say is a lie." Some of you will get that tomorrow. Or, "All generalizations are false." Some of you will never get that one, okay? These are self-defeating statements, and the culture is full of them. And once you get used to identifying self-defeating statements, you realize that relativism is false, that there is a real truth out there. By the way, we call this process of turning a claim on itself. That's what you want to do. You want to see if the claim meets its own standard. We call that the roadrunner tactic in the book. You can get the book to figure out why. But with this one little tactic, you look like a super genius. How about this? You hear this a lot. There's no such thing as absolute truth. If someone would ever say this to you, what question would you ask them? Yeah, you could say, "Is that an absolute truth?" Or if you want to have some fun, you can say, "Are you absolutely sure?" See, because that's an absolute truth claim. It claims there are no absolute truths, while it itself is an absolute truth. Once again, you look like a super genius. This one is my favorite one, though. "It's true for you, but not for me." Well, Christianity may be true for you, but atheism's true for me. What do you say to someone who says that? This is also self-defeating. It's just a little bit more subtle. If someone says it's true for you, but not for me, say, "Is that true for everybody? Is true for you, but not for me, true for everybody? Because if true for you, but not for me, is true for everybody, then true for you, but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody." Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough, but that's because it's self-defeating. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Actually, there's a fun way of dealing with this. If somebody says it's true for you, but not for me, say, "Sure, go try that with your bank teller." Yeah, go to your bank teller one day and say, "Look, I need some extra money. I'd like $100,000 out of my account." The bank teller looks at your account and says, "I'm sorry, I only have $6.04 in your account." Never fear. Just say, "Ha, that's true for you, but not for me. Give me the 100 grand. Are you going to get the money? No, if it's true there was only $6.04 in your account, that's true for all people at all times in all places. We're referring to your account at that time. That's just true. Or let's say you're going a little fast down Highway 4 out here. You're going 90 in a 55. Cop sees you, pulls you over, walks up to your car, knocks on the glass, you put the window down. He says, "You were going 90 in a 55. Very easy to get out of a ticket. You simply look up at him and you go, "Ha, that's true for you, but not for me." And you speed away. Can't give you a ticket if it's not true for you. No, if it's true you were going 90, that's true for all people at all times in all places, and we're referring to you at that time. By the way, the same is true with regard to Christianity. If it's true that Jesus really died and rose again, that's true for all people at all times in all places, whether you believe it or not. Of course, it's true if he didn't rise from the dead. Even if you believe it, that won't make him risen from the dead, right? In fact, I go to a lot of churches. I normally ask them, "Do you believe this book is true?" And most people will say yes, and then I'll ask them, "Why?" Do you know what answer I get more than any other? "Because I have faith." Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not this book is true? Does your faith change whether or not God exists or Jesus rose from the dead? Of course not. Your faith doesn't change a thing about those things. I mean, do you have to believe something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No, that's not the way it works. You say, well, why is the Bible always talking about faith? Because there's two kinds of faith. There's belief that, and then there's belief in. Belief that is getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that the Bible is true. That's what we call apologetics. You're not saying you're sorry. You're giving evidence that your belief is true. But all the belief that in the world won't get you exonerated from the punishment you deserve for the moral crimes you've committed. You have to go from belief that to belief in. You have to trust in the sacrifice for your sins. That's Jesus. And all the belief that in the world won't force you to do so. In fact, James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called James, says even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. Why? Because they don't trust in him. They don't want to trust in him. In fact, to go from belief that to belief in isn't just a matter of the head, it's also a matter of the heart. You can intellectually know something that's true and not assent to it. In fact, the Bible even teaches everyone knows there's a creator God, but they suppress the truth because they don't want there to be a creator God. So there's a difference between belief that and belief in. Belief that is intellectual. Belief in is not just intellectual, it's also volitional. It's also of the heart. In fact, a marriage is a good illustration of this. When I first met my wife 30 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife. But all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. That's the difference between belief that and belief in. Most of the time when the Bible's talking about faith, it's talking about belief in. Trust in Jesus. In fact, the better word is trust. In the Greek, it actually means trust, not faith, because faith in our context today means you don't have any evidence. That's not the biblical definition, but that's what we think. No, you already have belief that. Now you got to go to belief in. Trust in after you know that it's true. How about this? Here's another one you'll hear a lot. You ought not judge. If somebody says you ought not judge, what question should you ask them? Hey, isn't that a judgment? Next time somebody says you ought not judge, put your hands on your hips and say, then why are you judging me for judging? By the way, did Jesus say don't make judge or don't make judgments or don't judge? No, what did he say? He said, judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you'll be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It is a command on how to judge. If you've got that problem in your life, get it out of your life, then go help your brother. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. It would be complete suicide to say don't make judgments. Everybody makes judgments. You'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You've made 100 judgments just this morning driving over here. Where to park was the biggest one, right? Here you got parking issues, right? You're always making judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? Atheists make judgments. What judgments do atheists make? Well, there is no God. There is no objective morality. You're wrong if you're a Christian. These are all judgments. I will say this, though. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? What did they do? What was their job? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. They were on the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, with the Sadducees, who were Sadducee because they didn't believe in the resurrection. Some of you will never get that. Okay. But they were political and religious leaders, and Jesus went after them. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes, and he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, have you ever heard someone say this? Oh, that guy is such a saint. He's never said a bad word about anyone. If that's the definition of a saint, Jesus was no saint. Just read Matthew chapter 23. What does he say in Matthew chapter 23 to these scribes and Pharisees? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? gentle? Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all just get along, boys and girls? No! He was not Mr. Rogers. Can you say kindness, boys and girls? Well, I mean, he was kind most of the time, but he certainly didn't go around saying, this sermon brought to you by the letter Q. No, Jesus was tough, and sometimes you need to be tough and tell people directly that there is a problem. In fact, I've noticed this recently about judging. Do you ever notice when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody ever gets upset? Like if I say to Pastor Ken, what a wonderful worship team you have. You're doing a great job. You think he's going to say, are you judging me? Who do you think you are? He's never going to say that, right? You see, I've noticed that people don't have a problem with judgments. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. And if you say to somebody something that's true and they get upset, you've just helped convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. In fact, for you military guys in here, if you tell somebody something that's true and they get upset, you're over the target. You always get more flack when you're over the target. So don't buy into this idea you can't make judgments. We're to make judgments without being judgmental. Someone put it this way, evangelism is just one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. So we got to have the right attitude. But don't buy into this attitude that Jesus was a sissy or never called people. In fact, he was the most politically incorrect person in history, if you think about it. He was so politically incorrect, they killed him for it. There's just one problem with truth. A lot of people don't want it. In fact, here's a question you should ask people who are not Christians. This is a question I ask all the time, particularly on college campuses. Atheists will ask questions, and if they get a little hostile, I'll stop and ask them this question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had many atheists yell back at me, no! No? Wait, you claim to be an atheist, a beacon of reason. Never mind if atheism's true, reason doesn't exist. Why? Because if atheism's true, we're not really reasoning anyway, because we're just molecular machines. We're just moist robots. There's no immaterial reality, so we shouldn't trust anything we think. So, but let me leave that aside for a second. I ask you, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And you say no. How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. The problem isn't here. The problem's here. They don't want it to be true. They can believe that it's true, but they don't want to trust in. Why? Because they don't want there to be a God. They want to be God. You see, the elephant in the room, particularly on a college campus where I spend a lot of my time, is not evidence. They're not interested in evidence. The elephant in the room is morality and accountability. They don't want it. They're not on a truth quest. They're on a happiness quest. They're going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. The problem is, over the short term, you can do a lot of stupid, sinful things that'll make you happy over the short term, but long term, it's a disaster. Many of us in here who have a little gray hair already know that, right? We tried it, and it didn't work. The only way to get true happiness is to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. As Pascal put it, people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. So ask your friends, or maybe you're not a Christian. Ask yourself, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If you hesitate, or the answer is no, the problem isn't here, the problem's here. You don't want it to be true. The cost of discipleship might be too high. That's right. If you don't want to be a Christian, don't. God, I just want to let you know that God won't force you into heaven against your will. If you don't want Christ now, you're not going to want him in eternity. But since it's true, maybe you ought to check it out. In fact, a friend of mine who's a cold case homicide detective, Jim Wallace, he says was an atheist for his first 35 years. He's been married for 36 years. So the first 18 years he was an atheist, the next 18 years he was a Christian, being married. And he said, if you ask my wife what the better years were, she'd say the first 18. Because it was easier. It's hard being a Christian. You got to do stuff you don't want to do sometimes. You got to carry your cross, deny yourself. It's much easier living by your own moral code than gods. So there is truth out there. The next question is it true that God exists? Is it true that God exists? We know that truth exists, which means relativism is false. So the question is it true that God exists? And there are three great arguments we talk about for the existence of a theistic God. That's a being beyond the world who created the world and sustains the world. I'm just going to list them here. We're just going to spend a few minutes talking about them. We don't have a lot of time. But the first argument is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in life, you, then there must be a designer. Now, these two arguments have scientific evidence behind them. We'll see some of that evidence here in just a minute. The third argument doesn't have science behind it because it's not a scientific argument. It's more philosophical in nature. But it's the argument we've all understood since we were very small children. We knew it intuitively. And it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, or it's wrong to crucify children like ISIS is doing right now, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no authoritative moral standard beyond humanity, then everything is just a matter of human opinion. You don't like a baby torturer, but you can't say he's objectively wrong because there's no objective right. You don't like Hitler, but you can't say he was objectively wrong if there is no objective right. You think what ISIS is doing is terrible, but if there is no objective standard beyond humanity, that's just your opinion against theirs. Well, we all know there are certain things that are really right and certain things that are really wrong. If that's the case, God exists. Why? Because his nature, by definition, is the standard of goodness, and any deviation from that standard is what we would call evil. We don't have time to get into that argument here tonight or this morning. We may mention it tonight if you can come back, but let's start here at the beginning, the cosmological argument. And this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now some of you going, Frank, you know, we're Christians in here, we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good, even atheists are admitting this. Stephen Hawking, one of the top atheists in the world, says almost everyone now believes that space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing at the Big Bang. Now, he tries to come up with another explanation other than God to create the Big Bang, but he fails. What he is admitting, though, is space, matter, and time had a beginning out of nothing. And all the evidence is in the book, chapter 3, if you want to go into it. It's not even controversial anymore. Everyone's going, yep, the universe had a beginning. The question is, what caused the universe? Well, if space, matter, and time had a beginning, whatever caused the universe can't be made of space, matter, and time, right? In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful in order to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, intelligent, because as we'll see here in a minute, the universe is also designed. Now, when you think of a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? That's what we mean by God. Now, as I say, there's a lot of evidence in the book about that, but I want to jump to the second argument, the design argument, the teleological argument. And the universe is designed and so is life, but let's just take a look at the universe first. There's something out there called the fine-tuning of the universe, and what this means is, this is a new discovery. When I say new, 50, 60 years ago, scientists began discovering that the universe is so precisely fine-tuned or tweaked. Certain factors about the universe are just right, and if they were any different, just imperceptibly, there would be no universe. For example, Stephen Hawking, the guy I just mentioned, the atheist, said it this way about the expansion rate of the universe. He said if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. If you change the expansion rate that infinitesimal amount, we're not here. From the very beginning. Now, you can't make any evolutionary argument for this. You can't say the universe evolved to this point by chance. Why? Because these are initial conditions. The being that created the universe is the same being that put the expansion rate exactly where it is. And if it were any different slightly, we would not be here. Also, the gravitational force is fine-tuned. If it were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40, we wouldn't be here. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. Let me give you an illustration. Take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. That's a long way. Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I realize gravity is not measured in inches, but this is just to give you a scale idea in your mind. If you were to move the strength of gravity 1 inch in either direction, across a scale as wide as the entire known universe, we wouldn't be here. I don't have enough faith to believe that that value is where it is by chance, whatever that means. Somebody put that value right there, because if it were 1 inch off, there would be no universe that we could live in. This universe is fine-tuned. So is our solar system, by the way. Where are we in the solar system? Right there, third rock from the sun. Who said you don't learn from sitcoms? Right there. If we were just a little bit closer to or a little bit further away, we wouldn't be here. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We're what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It's not just right here in the summer. I'm sorry. Okay, it's too hot. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly. We don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly. We don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us. Change that slightly. We don't exist. Oxygen in this room right now is 21%. If it were 15%, we'd all suffocate. If it were 25%, spontaneous fires would break out. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we wouldn't be here. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Jupiter is a cosmic vacuum cleaner. Its gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you see what these purple marks are right here? Those are from comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. In fact, you want to see the size of Jupiter? Check this out. There you go. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. There it is right there. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun over here. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus right here. You see Arcturus? Where's Arcturus now? Right there, left of the white star Rigel. That's Antares, another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Beetlejuice here would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. This is just in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. These are stars in our galaxy. In fact, the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles. All that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles. How far is that? Far. Take you at least 2 tanks of gas on a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. I was out in the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona a number of years ago. If you ever get out to Tucson, if you go to this museum outside at night, if it's a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we were out there one night. We had a guide, and the guide said, "It's so clear tonight, if we look up at 9:03, we'll see the space shuttle in orbit." I said, "Oh, come on, we're not going to see the space shuttle. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. No way are we going to see it." At 9:03, the guide goes, "Look!" We look up in the sky, about 70 degrees above the horizon. There's an object streaking out of the west relative to us about like this. I mean, it's really cooking. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up that the sun was still reflecting off of it. And when it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at 18,000 miles an hour. Goes around the Earth once every hour and 15 minutes. 18,000 miles an hour is 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to work in the morning? Take the space shuttle. You'll be there. 5 miles a second. Think about how fast that is. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy, an average distance away, 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles at 5 miles a second? How long do you think it would take us? This is the interactive portion of the program. How? Years. It would take us years. It's a good answer. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy, an average distance away, going 5 miles a second, you'd be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We could barely get out of our solar system. Imagine trying to go 200,000 years to another star. Who'd like to go to the next nearest star? We'll go. Get in, kids! Are we almost there yet, Dad? Another 200,000 years. Play some more Xbox. I mean, think about it. It's crazy. And how many stars are out there? You know how many stars are out there? The number of stars that are out there are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the Earth. You see this picture here? The picture on the left is from the ground. You see that little square inside that picture? That's this square from the Hubble Space Telescope. Those are stars, planets, heavenly bodies. February 1st, 2003, President Bush went into the East Room of the White House. It was Saturday afternoon. They turned the TV camera on. Every major network carried his address. Saturday afternoon? National address? Why? The president looked in the camera and said, "My fellow Americans, this morning our country experienced a great tragedy. Upon re-entry into the atmosphere, the space shuttle Columbia burned up in the skies over Texas. There are no survivors. The Columbia is lost." The president went on to quote from Isaiah chapter 40. Why Isaiah chapter 40? Because in Isaiah chapter 40, God is speaking. And what does God say? "To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One." In other words, you want a comparison? You want to know what God is like? Here it is. "Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these stars and named them one by one? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing." The president looked back in the camera and said, "The same God that created and knows the names of all these stars is the same God that created and knows the names of the 7 astronauts who perished today. While they did not return safely home to us, we can all now pray they've all returned safely home." You want to know who God is like? Most Christians have the wrong idea of who God is like. We think God is a big angel. No, God is not a big angel. You want to know what God is like? Meditate on the attributes of God. Spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent, self-existing, creator who sustains his creation every second, even as we sit here right now. Meditate on those attributes, then remove all limits from your mind. That's God. Why is there a second commandment? Thou shalt make no graven image. Well, one reason there's a second commandment is that any image you make of an infinite being necessarily limits his majesty. You can't draw a picture of an infinite being. Oh, you can draw a picture of Jesus. Why? Because Jesus has two natures. He has a human nature, which you can draw, and a divine nature, which you can't draw. Psalm 103, verse 11 says, God's love to those that fear him exceeds the height of the heavens above the earth. How high are the heavens above the earth? Stars equivalent to grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. 200,000 years at 5 miles a second between those stars. From our perspective, infinite. That's why the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. You want to know what I'm like? Look to the heavens. The closest thing in our experience to infinity are the heavens, and even they are finite. Even they are limited. And if you think the heavens, by the way, we use the word awesome too much. We use it casually. Oh, awesome hit, man. Awesome show. Wow, awesome song. No. There's only one entity that's awesome, and that's God. The being that created and sustains the entire universe. But you know what else is awesome? Not as awesome as God, but close. You are. In fact, tonight, we're going to go through some of the evidence for design in biology before we get to miracles in the New Testament. Because not only are the heavens pointing to God, so are you. In fact, tonight, we'll review points 1 and 2. We'll talk about miracles and the New Testament. For now, if you want to go further, the book and the DVDs are out there. There's that website if you want this PowerPoint presentation in a PDF form. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. We probably put up 2 videos a day, short videos that you can share with others. Many of them are Q&A videos where you get a question on campus, and we have a short answer to it, and you can share those with others. So sign up for our Facebook page, which is crossexamined.org, and Dr. Frank Turek. There are 2 of them. In fact, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these 3 into one social media platform. We call it UTwitface. Okay? So you may want to sign up for that. It's kind of a Jersey thing. We're on radio Saturdays, DirecTV Wednesday nights, and if you don't do anything else, at least download the free app. What's the app? Over 94,000 people have downloaded the app so far, and on it are all our radio shows, 1 a week, but there's also a quick answer section. What I mean by that is, if you're having lunch with a friend of yours and they say something that's wrong about Christianity, but you're not quite sure how to answer it, you can take out your iPhone, your Droid, or if you're one of the 8 people in the world that has a Windows phone, it'll work on that too. Okay? And you go to the quick answer section, and chances are the objection they've brought up, we have an answer to right in the Cross-Examined app, the quick answer section. 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examined. You'll find it there. All right? So as someone's talking and they're giving you an objection, you can say, hey, hang on, I'm getting a text. What about this? Now, again, we're going to go through all this tonight in more detail, so I hope you can come back and we can do some Q&A as well. Now, why do you want to do all this? Because you don't want this happening to you, your child, or your grandchild. By the way, when young people go off to a college and they leave the faith, you know what they're doing? They're adopting a new faith. Often it's the faith of atheistic materialism. And you've got to have a lot of faith to believe that. But there's one last thing we need to talk about before Pastor Ricky comes up. Do you know the being that created the universe and sustains the universe and created you and sustains you is the same being that added human flesh, came into this time-space continuum to save the very people who rebelled against him, and then he allowed those very people to torture and kill him so he could be just and take all the punishment that we deserve on himself. And that's why we even have a church like this. Because the infinite being is also an infinite being in terms of his justice and his love. And his justice and love come together right on the cross. And if you've never accepted the pardon for your deserved punishment for the moral crimes you've committed, you have an opportunity today to do so. If you have done it, but you're not living up to what Christ really has called you to live up to, you have an opportunity to pledge to do that here today. And Pastor Ricky's going to tell you how you can do that. Pastor Ricky, see you tonight. How many were here this morning or were somewhere else at the time? How many were not here this morning? You blew it. I can't go over everything we covered this morning, but let me just say this. What I'm going to say tonight is extremely controversial. Whenever you call something, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, it's going to be controversial. So it's absolutely critical that you listen closely, because I don't want you walking out of here thinking I said something I did not say. If you don't listen closely, the results can be disastrous.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
So what are you thinking about? All right, this morning, just in review, we mentioned that about 75% of young people go off to college and walk away from the church, and only about half of them come back by the time they're age 30, because they don't know the evidence that Christianity is true. That's one of the reasons anyway. And it's actually not difficult to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions in the affirmative to show that Christianity is true. Who can name the 4 questions for me? The first one is, does truth exist? What's the second? Does God exist? The third? Are miracles possible? And 4? Is the New Testament true? In review, here they are. This morning, that super groovin' music is from our TV show, which is on every Wednesday nights on DirecTV. And if you don't have DirecTV, it's on our website right there, crossexamine.org. We're also on radio every Saturday morning. That, again, is online, and it's on our app, which you should download. Cross-Examined, 2 words in the App Store. 2 words, Cross-Examined. And we said that these are the 4 questions that we need to go through. And then tonight, we said that we're going to have some time for Q&A. Actually, that's not true. We're not going to have time for Q&A. We're going to do all Q, no A. Everyone gets to ask a question, takes all the pressure off me, okay? Now, we're actually going to get to Q&A today, but let's just briefly review what we did this morning. A lot of people say there's no truth, but if someone ever says to you there is no truth, you're going to ask them what question? Is that true? Is it true that there is no truth? Because if it's true that there is no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. It's self-defeating to say there is no truth. Then we talked a little bit about the existence of God. What evidence do we have that God exists? And we said there were 3 major arguments that we were going to go through to show that God exists. The first is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. The second is from the design of the universe and the design of life, called the teleological argument. And the third is from morality, known as the moral argument. And we said the cosmological argument points back to the big. And we said that the evidence is so good for the Big Bang that even atheists are admitting this, that space, matter, and time had a beginning out of nothing. If that's the case, whatever created space, matter, and time can't be made of space, matter, and time. In other words, it must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and intelligent. And then we said that not only is the universe created out of nothing, it's also what we call fine-tuned. And we went through several reasons to show you that if any one of a number of factors about our universe were changed ever so slightly, either the universe wouldn't exist or life wouldn't exist, or both. And we ended by saying, you are also fine-tuned. This is where we ended this morning, so we're going to pick it up right here. This is in the womb at 11 weeks. Now, question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? This is human. In the womb at 11 weeks. We're all there at one point. In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I'll also try and be discreet for the old people in case you've forgotten how this works. But when your mother and your father got together, first of all, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. Now, seeing some of you limping here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool. But you were. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. You are truly amazing. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the genetic information that makes you you. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the genetic information that makes you you. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You have not received any more genetic information from this point until right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, inside of every one of your 40 trillion cells, there's a word that's 3.5 billion letters long. It's called your genome. It's the longest word we've ever discovered, which points back, obviously, to an intelligence, because if a message points back to a mind, we've got the longest message ever discovered inside every one of you. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the unborn child in the womb. Why do we kill, or we don't kill the 2-year-old? Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank, you can't legislate morality. Newsflash. This is the subject of our first book, aptly titled Legislating Morality. The only thing you can legislate is morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. Every law declares that. The question isn't whether or not you can legislate morality. The question is, whose morality will we legislate? And when people say, hey, don't impose your morality on me, don't legislate your morality on me, I go, why not? Would that be immoral? And then they're trying to legislate their morality on me. Notice that? But really, the answer to this is, look, I don't want to legislate my morality. I don't want to legislate your morality. I want to legislate the morality. The morality that Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. Look, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and only by them coming together can you perpetuate and stabilize society. I didn't make this up. This isn't my morality, it's the morality. If you've got a problem with how reality works, you don't have a problem with me, you've got a problem with the creator of reality. That's the issue. Christians have to stop hiding under their desks on these issues, because pretty soon they're going to come to this church and shut your doors down. And if you don't think so, you don't know history very well. Oh, we got the First Amendment. Nonsense. They're already ignoring the First Amendment. Wake up, people. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. Okay? From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you, anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this day. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. Knock it off. How do you know how to do this? Are you thinking about this? You're going, hang on, Frank, I got to make more red blood cells. Hold on. How is all this happening? Right now, as you sit here. You're not thinking about this, are you? Here's an argument for God we don't talk about anymore. We should. It really goes back to Aristotle. And it was baptized by Aquinas in the 1200s AD. It's called final causality, meaning that all of nature, living or non-living, is going in a direction. If it's going in a direction, there must be a mind behind it. For example, you ever wonder why an acorn always becomes an oak tree if it's properly nourished? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? Because it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And how does it know to become an oak tree? Is an acorn conscious? Is it in the ground going, how do I become an oak tree? No. Then how does it know if it doesn't have a mind or a consciousness? If it doesn't have its own mind directing it toward an end, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. That's what we mean by God. God just doesn't create the universe and leaves it. God creates the universe and sustains it. You ever wonder why the natural laws are so precise and orderly? Why do they do the same thing over and over again? In fact, where do laws come from? They come from lawgivers. Why can we build a space station or a spaceship here on Earth, launch it, and know that 9 years later it's going to pass within 7,000 miles of Pluto? Because we can rely on the laws of nature to do what they do consistently and repeatedly. Why? Because there's an orderer behind the laws of nature. That's what we mean by God. Do you know that developmental biologists do research on fruit fly embryos? They try and get the fruit fly embryo to become something other than a fruit fly very early in the embryonic process. And no matter what they do, these embryonic fruit fly embryos, or these fruit fly embryos, make heroic efforts to get back on track to become a fruit fly. Now, are these embryonic fruit flies, are they conscious? Are they going, I got to become a fruit fly? No, they're not conscious at all. Then how do they know how to become a fruit fly? They don't have a mind, so there must be an external mind directing them toward their end. In fact, these developmental biologists get 3 different results from these experiments. They either get a dead fruit fly, a mutant fruit fly, or a normal fruit fly. They don't even get a horse fly, much less a horse. Yet here are the evolutionists telling us that despite the fact that we try and use all our intelligence to try and get something to become something else, we can't do it. They're out there saying non-intelligence can do so. How does that make any sense? And even if macroevolution were true, you'd still need an external mind to direct the natural forces that allow it to go on. So whether or not macroevolution is true, you still need a mind, an external mind directing everything toward their end. Now in the book Stealing from God, we talk a lot about this, so if you want to look at this more, you can get that book to go a little bit deeper. The only point I want to make here is that nature and you and everything you see is goal-directed. If it's goal-directed, going in a direction, there has to be a mind directing it. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. As I mentioned in one of the services this morning, when the band was up here this morning playing, the band was creating and sustaining the music. What happened to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music was over. That's what God is to the universe. This is why Paul says, in him we live and move and have our being. This is why Paul says that in Christ all things are held together. This is why the writer of Hebrews says that God sustains all things by his powerful word. He doesn't just create it and leave it. He creates it and sustains it. None of us would be here if there wasn't a God right now actively holding this all together and directing it toward an end. All right? Now, let me just spend a few minutes on the moral argument. In April of 1945, the Allies liberated the Buchenwald concentration camp in Wiedmar, Germany. I had the opportunity to visit it about 5 years ago. They went through the front gate, which is still there. They looked off to the right and they saw the crematorium off in the distance. It's still there. When they got down to the crematorium, they looked into the courtyard, and this is what they saw. Brace yourself. Now, if there is no God, this isn't really wrong. This is just your opinion. If there is no standard beyond humanity, then you can't say that's really wrong. You just disagree with Hitler. In fact, how can you discover who's right and who's wrong? Mother Teresa, the Catholic nun who helped people most of her life, or the mass murderer Hitler? Well, let me ask you this question. How do you know which map of Scotland is better? What would you need to see in order to know which map was better? Yeah, you would need to see a real unchanging place called Scotland. If Scotland doesn't exist, then these two maps are meaningless. But since Scotland does exist, we can see that map A, while it's not perfect, is a better representation of the real Scotland than is map B. In other words, we have an external referent by which we can measure both maps, and we can see which map is closer to the real Scotland. That's exactly what we do when we compare Mother Teresa and Hitler. Mother Teresa wasn't the standard. Hitler wasn't the standard. There's a standard beyond both of them by which we measure both of them. And what is that standard? God's nature. He doesn't invent a standard. He doesn't look to a standard beyond him. He is the standard. The buck has to stop somewhere, and it stops with God's nature. He is what we mean by infinite goodness. Look, if there is no God, then the Nazis were not wrong. If you've got a worldview that tells you that the Nazis were not wrong, you've got the wrong worldview. If there is no God, then love is no better than rape. Not in an objective way. You may like love better, but it's not in any sense objectively better than rape. If there is no God, there are no human rights. I always hear people complaining that their rights are being violated, or they have a right to this or a right to that. You know, fashionable in our country now for some people, you have a right to an abortion, a right to same-sex marriage, you have a right to have other people pay for your contraception and all this. If there's no God, there's no rights to anything. Everything's a matter of opinion. Many of these people are atheists. They say, oh, we got a right to this and a right to that, but without God, there are no rights to anything. So what do they do? They steal from God while arguing against him. They're stealing rights, claiming they have rights, when in fact, if there is no God, there's no such thing as rights. There are just preferences. Also, tolerance is no better than intolerance. Question. Christians. Are Christians commanded to be tolerant? Be careful how you answer. No. Why? Because tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And in order to love people, you can't tolerate evil that they're doing. Kids. We got kids in here, right? There's kids in here, right? Who in here is a former child themselves? Okay, good. You understand this. If your parents tolerated everything you wanted to do, would they be loving? No, you can't tolerate everything somebody wants to do. If they're doing evil to hurt themselves or hurt others, you can't love them by tolerating that. You have to say, don't do this, because it'll hurt you and others. So no, tolerance is not our standard. In fact, tolerance in the face of evil is evil itself. Isaiah says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Isaiah 5:20. That's what we're doing in this country right now. And what are we doing? We're sitting on the sidelines. Religious crusades are not wrong. I had a couple of debates with Christopher Hitchens, who was a brilliant British atheist who had a British accent, so he sounded even more brilliant than he was. You can see the debates for free on our website, crossexamine.org. And he was always complaining about all the evil that religious people have done, to which I agreed with him. I said, yeah, Christopher, we have done evil, including the Crusades. But on your worldview, there's no such thing as evil. Because if there is no God, if we're just molecules in motion, there's no such thing as a moral law. There's no such thing as right and wrong. Everything's just a matter of opinion. So what's wrong with the Crusades if there is no God? In fact, if there is no God, you can't complain about the problem of evil. One argument that atheists often bring up, there can't be a good God because there's too much evil in the world. Well, that argument doesn't work. Why? Well, C.S. Lewis thought that there was no God for a while because he thought the world was too unjust. There was too much injustice in the world. And one day he realized he was wrong. He ultimately wrote his revelation in the book called Mere Christianity. Here's what he wrote. As an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how would I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, something can't be unjust unless something is just. Something can't be not right unless something is right. Something can't be immoral unless something is moral. So evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but evil doesn't disprove God because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. Again, atheists are stealing from God to argue against him. They're saying there's too much evil in the world, but there would be no such thing as evil unless God existed. Not because God is doing evil, but because he's the standard of good, which makes evil even possible. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but if evil exists, God exists. If real evil exists, God exists. Not because, again, he's doing evil, but because he's the standard of good by which we could even make sense of evil. In fact, the shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have good without evil. You can have sunshine without shadows, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. So, what do we learn from these three arguments? And there's a lot more in both books on these. I'm going through this very quickly. What do we learn from the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments about God? First of all, from the cosmological argument, we can see that this being is immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. Why? Because he created material, time, and space, so he can't be made of material, time, and space. We can also see that this being is extremely powerful because he created out of nothing. From the design argument, we can see he's extremely intelligent. He also sustains creation right now, and he has purpose. We're here for a reason. From the moral argument, we can see he's absolutely morally perfect, and he's also personal. How do we know he's personal from the moral argument? Because you only have a moral obligation to persons. You don't have a moral obligation to impersonal forces. If you go try and dunk a basketball, you're not sinning against the law of gravity. You only sin against persons. We also know this being is personal from the cosmological argument. You say, how so? Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons make choices. Impersonal forces can't make choices. Gravity doesn't make a choice. Gravity doesn't go, well, if Turek drops that remote one more time, I'm not going to pull it to the ground, right? Gravity just does the same thing over and over again. To go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, God, a person, had to make a choice. Now check this out. We have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, sustaining creator who has purpose, who's absolutely morally perfect and personal. This is the God of biblical Christianity identified without reference to the Bible. We haven't even opened the Bible yet, and yet we have a being suspiciously like the God of the Bible. Now, does this mean Christianity's true? No, not necessarily. Why? Because we don't even know anything about Jesus yet. I mean, it seems like we have a theistic God, a God who's beyond the world, who created the world and sustains the world. But there's other theisms out there, right? Maybe it's just Judaism. Maybe that's the true God. Or maybe Islam. Actually, it can't be Islam. Why? Because according to Islamic doctrine, Allah is arbitrary. He's not the standard of good. Whatever he does is good, but he's not the standard of good. So, but I throw it up here because it's one of the top three theistic religions. Now, if God wanted to tell us which one of these were really true, what could he do? Well, he could do something only he could do, and that would be a miracle. That would get our attention, in other words, to say, hey, listen to Moses and listen to Jesus. Don't listen to Muhammad. By the way, Muhammad never did miracles. When he was asked to do miracles, he said, I don't do miracles. I'm just a warner to tell you that there's one God. All the miracles attributed to Muhammad were attributed to him 150 years after he lived. In the Quran, there are no miracles. because he wasn't a prophet, because he wasn't confirmed by God like the New Testament and Old Testament prophets were. Now, of course, when you talk about miracles, some people believe miracles are impossible, like Noah. How can you believe in Noah? That seems like a crazy miracle. Or a resurrection. How can you believe in a resurrection? Everyone I know who's dead is still dead. How can you believe in a resurrection? Or how can you believe in Jonah and the whale? That seems to be a crazy miracle. Who can believe in that thing? Is that a whale of a tail or a tail of a whale? What's the deal with Jonah? Please. Now, question. What is the greatest miracle in the Bible? It's not the resurrection. Resurrection's easy. It's one of the most significant miracles in the Bible, but it's easy compared to the greatest. What's the greatest miracle? Yes, the greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, right? I mean, if it's true that God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible inside the universe? Of course, if he can create the whole show, can he do the Noah miracle? Can he raise Jesus from the dead? Can he keep Jonah alive in a fish for 3 days, or kill him and resurrect him and spit him out on land? That's easy for God to create the universe out of nothing. Now, here's the interesting thing. We have evidence that the first verse of the Bible is true. The Big Bang. And philosophical evidence that the universe had a beginning. If that's the case, every other one of these miracles is at least believable. In fact, Jesus even relates two of the most controversial miracles in the Old Testament to his own life, Noah and Jonah. Do you think Jesus thought Noah and Jonah were historical or hysterical? He thought they were historical, because if God can create the universe out of nothing, he can do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible inside the universe. Now, some of you are going, wait, Frank, what's this logically impossible stuff? I thought God can do anything. No, there's even some things God can't do. Like what? He can't do logically impossible things. Like he can't create a square circle. Doesn't exist. Can't create a married bachelor. Doesn't exist, although some guys try. Can't create a one-ended stick. Doesn't exist. Can't create an honest politician. Okay? There's some things that are just too hard for God. In fact, you can do some things that God can't do. Like what? You can change. He can't change. What's he going to change from? He's already a perfect being. Any change would necessitate a move from perfection to imperfection. Lie. He can't lie. He can't sin. We can do those things, but God can't. If he could do those things, it would make him weaker, because then he wouldn't be the standard of righteousness and goodness. Look, if God exists, miracles are possible, which is why C.S. Lewis said, but if we admit God, must we admit miracles? Indeed, you have no security against it. That is the bargain. One other thing I need to say about miracles, because people often say, well, I can't believe in miracles because I've never seen one. There's a lot of things you believe that you've never seen. You've never seen your mind, but you believe in that, I hope. You've never seen George Washington, but I hope you believe in him. There's a lot of things you've never seen that you believe in. Yet you shouldn't expect to see a lot of miracles. Why? Miracles by definition have to be rare. Right? You have to have regular events over and over again for a miracle to stand out. I mean, if people were resurrecting from the dead all the time, what would the miracle of Christ mean to us? It would mean nothing. Resurrections have to be extremely rare if they're going to get our attention. I mean, you go to somebody and you say, Jesus rose from the dead for your sins. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle George just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. You know, now I got to give the inheritance back. No, that would make miracles common. They have to be rare if they're going to get our attention. And miracles are extremely rare because they're there for a reason. They're not for entertainment. They're there to show this guy speaks for God, follow him. Now, there's more we can say on miracles, but we got to move on to the New Testament because we have limited time here. We know that truth exists, that God exists, that miracles are possible. What evidence do we have that the New Testament writers are telling the truth? And there are 6 lines of evidence. They all begin with the letter E. The book has a chapter called The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Told the Truth. Here's just 6 of them. We're only going to look at 2 because we have limited time. First of all, we have early testimony. Secondly, we have eyewitness testimony. Thirdly, we have embarrassing testimony. Number 4, we have excruciating testimony. Number 5, expected testimony. That deals with Old Testament prophecy. And number 6, we have extra-biblical testimony. In other words, these are writers outside the New Testament that tell us something about Jesus and the early Christians. We only have time to do a couple of these. we're going to talk a little bit about embarrassing testimony and excruciating testimony. Now, what is embarrassing testimony? Well, embarrassing testimony goes like this. If you're trying to figure out if a writer's telling the truth, if there are embarrassing details in the text about the writer or writers, it's probably true. Why? Because you're not going to invent details about yourself that make yourself look bad, right? I mean, you don't even do this now. Let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? You don't do that. Why would you do that? Well, the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament documents. By the way, this is true of the Old Testament as well, but we're just looking at the New Testament. The New Testament writers have filled the New Testament documents with embarrassing details about themselves. Duh, they're not making this up. For example, they depict themselves as dim-witted. They fail to understand what Jesus is saying several times. In fact, they don't really even get his mission until he's already ascended to heaven. Then they go, wow, I could have had a V8. But up to that point, they don't really get it. It's embarrassing. They are depicted as uncaring. They fall asleep on Jesus not once, but twice in his greatest hour of need. Stay up with me and pray. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he knows he's going to be executed the next day. Stay up with me and pray. I need you. Oh, we'll pray, Lord. Don't worry. What do they wind up doing? Conking out on him twice. And then they make no effort to give Jesus a proper burial. Who buries Jesus? Joseph of Arimathea. Who's he? He's a member of the Sanhedrin. What did the Sanhedrin do? They sentenced Jesus to die. Why would they make Joseph look like a good guy while they ran away and hid for fear of the Jews? And what could the Jews have done if they wanted to squash Christianity? I mean, the Christians are claiming Jesus has risen from the dead, yet Jesus' own dead body is in the Jews' own tomb. What could the Jews have done to squash Christianity right then and there? Just go to their own tomb and take out the body and say, stop all this nonsense talk about the resurrection. He's dead. Here he is. They didn't do that at all. What did they say? They said the disciples came and stole the body while the guards were asleep. Now, that's a bad explanation for at least two reasons. Reason number one, if you're a Roman guard on duty and you fall asleep on watch, what happens to you? You're toast. Reason number two, if you're a Roman guard on duty and you fall asleep on watch, how do you know what happened? What happened? Well, we were asleep, see? And while we were sleeping, we noticed that the disciples came right there. No, that doesn't make any sense. What motive would the New Testament writers have to steal a dead body anyway and proclaim it resurrected? It doesn't make any sense. You say, well, how do you know that was their story? Well, it's in the Gospel of Matthew. Well, how do you know Matthew's telling the truth? Because it's not just Matthew who says this. There's an ongoing debate early on in Christianity. Writers are going back and forth. The Christians are saying Jesus has risen from the dead, and the Jews keep saying the disciples stole the body while the guards were asleep. Well, what does that explanation admit implicitly? That the tomb was empty, right? You don't need to come up with an empty tomb story if he's still in there. You'd say, no, his body's here. He's dead. They don't. They admit the tomb's empty. In fact, we could add another E to this list. We could add enemy testimony. Enemy testimony is very powerful. When your enemy says something that helps your case, that's powerful. Like if your mother says you're brave, everyone goes, okay, that's mom. But if your arch enemy says you're brave, right? Because that's helping your case. Here are the Jews helping the Christians' case by coming up with an explanation for an empty tomb. Also, notice they are rebuked. Peter, their leader, is called Satan by Jesus. You think they invented this? You think Mark at one point recorded this and said, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I want to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Why is he calling me Satan? I'm the leader here. That's embarrassing. And then, later on, Paul rebukes Peter for being wrong about a theological issue. He said, look, I told Peter to his face that he was wrong for trying to get the New Testament believers to obey the Old Testament law. This right here in Galatians chapter 2. Paul is rebuking Peter for being wrong in the Bible. That's embarrassing, don't you think? Also, notice they are cowards. Peter denies Christ 3 times after saying, Lord, I'll never deny you. Think about this. This is their leader. He's called Satan by the Lord. Then he says, Lord, I'll never deny you. He denies him 3 times. And later Paul has to dope slap him for being wrong about theology. This is not invented. And then, at the crucifixion, the disciples run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! They all run away. And who are the brave ones? Yes, the women. That's right. The women are the brave ones. Where were you, sissy pants men? Now, who wrote this down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews, why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man here invent that? No way. I mean, if I was there and I was inventing this story, I'd write something down like this. Let's see. We marched right down there bravely and took on that elite Roman guard. Peter said, "Get out." John roundhouse kicked him. Philip said, "We'll be back." Then we went to the tomb early that Sunday morning and saw Jesus emerge from the tomb, and he congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say I was Mr. Sissy Pants why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, if you were inventing this in that culture, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're inventing the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all four Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. As embarrassing as it was, they're telling the truth. I had a lady come up to me once and she said, "I know why Jesus appeared to the women first." I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because he wanted to get the story out." I said, "That is an excellent point. I had not thought of that." Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a terrorist attack down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll learn about it on the news. And you'll go, "Why did you tell you? I forgot." Yeah. Not going to tell you. Also, notice they are doubters. Despite being taught several times that Jesus would rise from the dead, the disciples are doubtful when they hear of his resurrection. Not only are they doubtful when they hear of his resurrection, check this out. Some are even doubtful after they see him risen. This is Matthew 28:17. What happens in Matthew 28:19? Anyone? Yeah, the Great Commission. No, Thomas is in John. This is the end of the Gospel of Matthew. The Great Commission. Jesus is giving them the Great Commission. His disciples are there, and he says, "Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations." Notice he doesn't say make believers. There's a difference. Make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen, and lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. And as he's standing there, some of his disciples are standing there looking at him going, "You see that guy over there? Yeah, that guy over there is Jesus." "Oh, no, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago." "No, I'm telling you, it's Jesus." "It can't be Jesus. The Romans killed him. They put the spear in his side, blood and water came out. I'm telling you, the guy was dead." "No, it's Jesus." "It can't be Jesus." "It is." "How do you know?" "The women told me." They're not making this up. Also, notice there's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus. Check this out. He's considered out of his mind by his own family who come to seize him and take him home. In Mark chapter 3, his own family thinks he's nuts. That's embarrassing. You may have heard some people say, well, the scholars have invented, or the scholars say that the New Testament writers invented Jesus to be God. Really? Then why are they putting this kind of thing in there? He's deserted by many of his followers. In John chapter 6, he says, "Look, if you want to follow me, you must eat my flesh and drink my blood." And many of the followers said, "This is a hard teaching. We can't follow this guy anymore." Hey, if I was there, I'd say the same thing. Eat flesh, drink blood. What are you, a cannibal? I'm not following you either. And who would have invented the eat flesh, drink blood comment? That's not invented. That's authentic. He's not believed in by his own brothers. Very embarrassing to have his own brothers not believe in him. We learn later, however, that James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote the little book in the New Testament called James, dies as a martyr in 62 AD as the pastor of the church in Jerusalem. The Sanhedrin throw him off the Temple Mount. When he hits the ground, they stone him to death. Does any New Testament document tell us this? No. You know who tells us this? Josephus, the Jewish historian, who lived from 37 AD to about 100 AD and was probably in Jerusalem at the time. He and Hegesippus, another writer, historian later, tells us that James, the half-brother of Jesus, dies as a martyr about 30 years after Jesus is alleged to have risen from the dead. In the very city, Jesus is alleged to have risen from the dead. Now, why would he do this? When before the resurrection, he didn't think his own brother was God. After the resurrection, he does. If you go to 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8, the earliest evidence for the resurrection in the entire Bible, it's an ancient creed that's put into writing in 1 Corinthians. Paul writes this creed down, and it names all the people that Jesus appeared to. Many of them, anyway. The women aren't in there, but everyone else is. And one of the people that Jesus appeared to was James. That must have convinced him that, yeah, you are God. I mean, before the resurrection, James didn't think his own brother was God. After the resurrection, yo, bro, you're God. Now, how many people in here have a brother? And how many people in here have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah. You don't believe in him either. Neither did James. Also, he's thought to be a deceiver. He turns off Jewish believers to the point that they want to stone him. In John chapter 8, he's talking to Jews who believed in him. He gets to the point in the conversation where he says, look, if you believe in Abraham, you ought to believe in me, because I knew Abraham. And they said, you're not even 50 years old. How could you know Abraham? And he said, before Abraham was born, I am. And they immediately pick up stones to stone him. What's that a quotation from? I am. That's a quotation from Exodus 3:14, the burning bush. Do you remember when God appeared to Charlton Heston? Moses says to God, who should I tell the Israelites you are? And God says, tell them I am sends you. What does I am mean? In fact, we sang it this morning. What does it mean? It means the self-existent eternal one. The being that had no beginning, the being that had no end, the being that gives being to every other being, the being that just bees. Jesus is claiming to be Yahweh, what Aristotle would call the unmoved mover. That's why they picked up stones to stone him. They knew exactly who he was claiming to be. It amazes me today. There are people out there who say Jesus never claimed to be God, like Jehovah's Witnesses. When they come to my door, I go, come on in. Have a seat. They get the Watchtower material out. I go, oh, before we get to the Watchtower, can I just ask you 2 questions? Yeah, sure. First question, as I mentioned this morning, I ask all unbelievers. You should use this question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Because a lot of times the problem isn't here, the problem's here. Real hard for a Jehovah's Witness to say no, or to say they would, because if they leave the Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall, they're going to be disfellowshipped. The second question, particularly for Jehovah's Witnesses, is this. If Jesus never claimed to be God, then why did they kill him? For saying love your neighbor? Does that get you killed? Jesus is out giving a sermon. He goes, so love your neighbor. There's people in the audience going, what did you say? Love your neighbor. I dare you to say that again. No, that doesn't get you killed. You get killed for claiming to be God. Why? Because that's blasphemy to the Jews and it's sedition to the Romans. Jesus certainly didn't get killed for skipping around saying love your neighbor and bless those who persecute you. He was killed because he claimed to be God. Also notice Jesus is called a madman. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. You think they invented that? Hey, people are calling the Lord demon-possessed. No, they're just telling the truth, as embarrassing as it is. And then he has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, you notice there are 2 prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline? Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Do you think Matthew and Luke got together at one point and said, you know what, I really think we need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. Let's see, Rahab, Tamar. No! In fact, there's a lot of bad people in the genealogy. Judah, from where we get the term Jew, bad guy. David's in there. He's an adulterer, a liar, and a murderer, yet he's after God's own heart. Oh, gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us, huh? Bathsheba's in there. In fact, one of the writers won't even mention her name. You know what he says in the genealogy? Uriah's wife. Ooh, that's a slam, isn't it? But he's telling the truth. Uriah was the husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. You don't find this in the Pharaoh histories. If there's any embarrassing details that a Pharaoh historian puts down, what's the Pharaoh going to do to that historian? He's done. If you want the ultimate no-spin zone, here it is. They tell you all the warts and sins and embarrassing things of everyone because they're telling the truth. They're not making it up. Also, Jesus is crucified despite the fact that anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. If you're making a Messiah to the Jews, you don't hang him on a tree. Why? Because that man is under God's curse. What curse? The curse of sin that we all put him under. But if you were inventing this, you would never say that. So this is not an invented story. Let's do one more, and then we'll get to your questions. Excruciating testimony. What is excruciating testimony? Well, this word literally means out of the crucifixion. That's where we get the word from. And this is the argument that says that these men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had risen from the dead or not died excruciating deaths when they could have just saved themselves by saying, look, it never happened. But they didn't. They went to their deaths, claiming it was true. In fact, let's look at the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection. Now, I'm going to do a short two-column chart here, and as I do this, I want you to keep in your mind this fact. All of the New Testament writers, with the exception of Luke, were all Jews. They thought they were God's chosen people. What motive did they have to make up a new religion is the question. And before Jesus came, they believed in animal sacrifice. They'd been slaying lambs and other animals for hundreds of years to Yahweh. Suddenly, Jesus comes along and they say, we don't need to do this anymore. We don't need to slay all these lambs because they're just symbols of the true lamb that takes away the sins of the world. Here he is. Before, they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, they say, Jesus has fulfilled the binding law of Moses. In fact, Jesus himself does away with the dietary laws in Mark chapter 7. Before, they believed in strict monotheism. Afterwards, they believe in a trinity, 3 persons in one divine essence. Yes, I know the Trinity is hinted at in the Old Testament, but it's much clearer in the New. Before, they believed in the Sabbath. In fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. Afterwards, they're worshiping on Sunday. And Paul says, don't let anyone ever tell you have to obey any Sabbath or festival day. In fact, out of the 9 commandments, or the 10 commandments in the Old Testament, 9 of them are repeated in the New Testament. Which one isn't? Keep holy the Sabbath. Why? Because who is the Sabbath? Jesus is the Sabbath. Jesus is our rest. The Sabbath was a forward-looking symbol of rest, and Jesus provides us with rest. Before, they believed in a conquering Messiah, afterwards a sacrificial Messiah. Before, they believed in circumcision. Afterwards, they believed in baptism and communion. Now, what would have caused these pious Jews, who thought they were God's chosen people for a couple of thousand years, what would have caused them to abandon everything on the left and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that occurs in your life that is so dramatic and impactful that it could cause you to change your perspective 180 degrees. Some impact events are so dramatic, you'll remember the event for 50 years if it's that long ago. You may not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, but you'll remember an impact event that happened years ago. In fact, only some of you are going to be able to answer this question, but I'll ask it anyway. If you can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963, raise your hand and hold it up. The rest of you, look around. You see these people with their hands up? These people are very old. November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. Yes, I'm 54 years old now. I know I don't look a day over 53. In fact, when I hit 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? And she said, because you look half dead already. I said, well, thanks a lot. Anyway, November 22nd, 1963, I'm 2 years old and 2 days. I'm a toddler. I'm standing in our living room, and my mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I can still see my mother right now in my mind as if she were sitting there right now when she was 26 years old. She's 78 today. But I can see her when she was 26. Impact event. I don't remember anything before that day and very little after that day. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? Most of you in here can remember what you were doing. I was actually in my home office in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had the TV on behind me. I had seen the first tower had been hit. I didn't know by what. I was talking to a pastor in Charlotte. He wanted me to come to his church and talk about something. We were trying to figure out the topic. I said, "You got the TV on?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Maybe a Cessna hit the World Trade Tower." And we're talking, and suddenly he screams into the phone. He goes, "The second tower just got hit." I turned around, looked at the TV. The second tower's on fire. I said, "Was it a Cessna?" He goes, "No. It was like a United plane. It was a passenger plane. It flew right in there and exploded." I said, "You saw that?" He goes, "It was just on live TV." I said, "Look, let me call you back." I hung up the phone. For some reason that morning I had CNN on, the Communist News Network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said this: "One has to think there's some sort of navigational error here." I said, "Navigational error? You doofus. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. What do you think, pilots can't see where they're going? You think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? I mean, come on. This is terrorism." I called that pastor the next day. I said, "We're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to." Now, 9/11 was over 14 years ago. But those who are old enough in here, if I asked you where you were and what you were doing that day, you could tell me. But if I asked you where you were and what you were doing 14 days ago, most of you are going to go, "I don't know, let me look at my iPhone. What was I doing that day? I don't know." Why can you remember something from 14 years ago but not 14 days ago? Impact event 14 years ago. No impact event 14 days ago. Do you think if Jesus really rose from the dead, that would have been an impact event? Do you think the disciples would have remembered everything Jesus was saying and doing until the day they died? Of course. That's the only way I could figure out why they would have abandoned everything on the left and adopted everything on the right virtually overnight. Remember, they were Jews. They had no motivation to make up a new religion. In fact, what motive did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? Or what did they have to gain? What did they get by saying Jesus had risen from the dead? They got beaten, tortured, and killed. We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah, what's it going to get us? Well, first we'll get excommunicated from the synagogue, and then we'll get beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up! You know, what a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this earlier? No, I don't think so. In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. I get this question a lot. Maybe you do. If you're a Christian, you'll get the question, well, are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, there are. In chapter 9 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, they're all listed there. But you know what the question really assumes underneath it? You really can't trust these people, see, because these people were religious people. And religious people lie. They make things up. You can only trust the secular writers. If you think about this for more than 10 seconds, you'll realize how stupid that is. What did the New Testament Jewish writers have to gain by making up the resurrection story? Nothing. They had every motive to say it didn't happen, not every motive to say it did. If anybody's going to tell the truth, it's these people. Why? Because they paid for saying it was true with their lives. Why would they die for a known lie? You say, wait a minute, Frank, you just got done talking about 9/11. Muslims have martyrs. And in fact, in Surah 4, the 4th chapter in the Quran, verse 157, it says Jesus never even died. So he couldn't have risen from the dead, yet the New Testament documents say he did die and rise from the dead. They both can't be true, but they both have martyrs. So isn't the whole martyrdom argument kind of a wash? No. Why? There's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. But let me just give you one difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs don't have evidence that Islam is true. They just have faith. But the New Testament martyrs were in a position to know whether Jesus had risen from the dead. They saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. You see, many people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. So, what's the summary? The summary is we have early eyewitness, embarrassing, excruciating, expected, and extra-biblical testimony. There's more reasons in both of the books if you want to go deeper on this. The overall argument is this. Does truth exist? The answer is yes. It's self-defeating to say it doesn't. Does God exist? Yes, we've got good evidence, the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments that God exists. Are miracles possible? What's the greatest miracle? It's already occurred. The creation of the universe out of nothing. So if anyone ever says to you, I don't believe in miracles, you ought to say, look around, you're living in one. This universe is a miracle. And then there's evidence the New Testament's true, and as we mentioned this morning, if the New Testament's true, you get the Old Testament thrown in. All right? So again, if you want to go further, the books are available back there. Here is, again, the site you need to go to if you want this PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format. Type that into your browser right there, /CP, crossexamine.org/CP. Send us your email, and we will send you this PowerPoint presentation in a PDF form. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, as I mentioned. We're on radio. We're on TV. And also, please download the free app. The app is free. Cross-examined, 2 words, in the App Store. All right? Now, it's time for questions. And since no one likes to ask the first question, let's move right on to the second question. So, Ricky, are you going to get the mics? If you have a question, just pop your hand up, and we'll just start up right now. We got about 26 minutes for questions, so someone has to have a question. Phil Donahue moved faster. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Millennials talk about the universe instead of talking about God, particularly when it comes to judgment and all sorts of things. When you have a conversation with someone who talks about the universe, who doesn't believe in God, as though the universe was God, what's a question? You've done such a good job of giving us a response in question form. What's a good question for that kind of
If you get the app, the questions are in there, but let me go through them real quickly. When somebody makes a statement, it's not your job to refute what they say. It's that person's job to support what he says. So if someone says the universe is God, my first question is, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by the universe? Space-time continuum? So the first question is always, what do you mean by that? The next question is, how did you come to that conclusion? In other words, what evidence do you have for this position? You'll find out that most people who have a worldview that's opposed to Christianity, not all, but most people, if you ask them for evidence for their worldview, they have very little evidence. They just heard a slogan, and they like the slogan, and they believe the slogan, but if you just dig a little deeper into that, they have no way of giving you any evidence. The third question is, have you ever considered, and you complete the sentence, have you ever considered that both the scientific evidence and the philosophical evidence shows that the universe itself had a beginning? And if it had a beginning, then the universe is not the uncaused first cause. The universe is not what you would call God. There's something that transcends the universe that created the universe. So, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Have you ever considered? By the way, these are great questions not just to use when you're talking about spiritual issues, but they're great questions to use for anything. Parents in here, if one of your kids says, they call one night and say, Dad, I'm not going to be home by curfew at 11. My first question is, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? Have you ever considered that if you're not home by 11, you're grounded for 2 weeks? Be right home, Dad. By the way, use these questions advisedly, particularly husbands. Husbands, never use these questions with your wife. Never. Because if your wife calls you an idiot, don't say, what do you mean by that? Or, how did you come to that conclusion? She's going to have a list. And then you're sunk. All right. Next question. In the back, all the way in the back there, Ricky. Hey, can you turn up the monitors up here? It's hard for me to hear the questions from these speakers. I don't know if you can do that or not. Yes, sir.
Good evening.
Hey, how you doing?
I got a question for you. I've seen several of your debates with Hitchens. Hitchens has always kind of had me interested. I kind of classify him as a new atheist.
Yeah.
I mean, you did an excellent job presenting him the evidence, right? And anytime you rebutted, he just either dodged the question or used that famous British rhetoric to kind of,
right.
It was an emotional argument.
Sure.
And anytime you're debating an atheist, when they come up with those emotional arguments, I mean, as a Christian, how do you deal with that besides just pray for them? Because, I mean, at that point, what do you do?
Well, one of the things I think you can do is ask the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Because that really clears all the decks. If the way I ended both debates with Christopher Hitchens, who, by the way, has passed on. He just died about 4 years ago. And a lot of people loved Hitchens because he just was witty and funny. In fact, this next week we'll have Larry Taunton, who just wrote a new book on Christopher Hitchens called The Faith of Christopher Hitchens, on the radio, so you can hear about this tomorrow. I'm going to interview Larry on it. But Christopher, if his public persona is true, and Larry in this book points out that he actually had a private persona which wasn't like his public persona. But if his public persona is true, or was true, he was just angry at God, very angry, which is why I ended both debates by saying this. Here's Christopher Hitchens' book in one sentence. There is no God, and I hate him. Right? He was just mad at God. So if you got to get past the emotion, you see, atheists are often angry. And they're angry because they've been either hurt by Christians or they've been hurt most often by a father figure. In fact, Paul Vitz of New York University has done some research into this and found out that of the most prominent atheists of the past century or two, all of them, without fail, have had either a bad relationship with their father or no relationship with their father. It's really hard to think about a heavenly father who cares for you when your own earthly father doesn't. Yes, go ahead.
Just one more thing to add. I guess that's what always amazed me, because I watched him and Peter Hitchens debate.
His brother, yeah.
And Peter's completely opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, you mentioned about the issue with his father and stuff like that, and I guess at that point, that's when I look and say, you know, someone can take the evidence of God, someone take, you know, what God does in their life and look at the two complete outcomes. And I guess that's part of the reason why heart always broke for Hitchens, because you could tell he was an intelligent man, but like you said, he was just flat out angry.
Yeah, but in private, he wasn't as bad, and you might want to get Larry's book on this.
I will.
It's a good book.
The only time I ever saw Hitchens even kind of open up, he did that little documentary with Doug Wilson.
Yeah.
And there's a few scenes in the back of the limo or whatever it was where he kind of opened up, and I know a lot of people, I know at least for me, I hope and pray that was at least something that
right.
Be a glimmer of hope. But
right.
I think the problem with that, though, is he's got such a large following that has seen only his public persona, that they're all riding on that and doesn't really see the human side of him.
Yeah, well, the cost of discipleship is high when you have so many adoring fans adoring you for being an atheist. Yes. Okay, there's a lady over here, Ricky. Do we have two mics? Oh, you got one too, Brian. Okay, we'll go over here right after this lady. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. We have a daughter who works at Johns Hopkins, and she works with some Muslims,
Mm-hmm.
and we always talk about things, and she always says, they aren't all bad, Mom.
They're what?
They're not all bad.
Well, of course they're not. Just like not all Christians are good, so to speak. Right. Yeah, but the question is the question, is she trying to say that Islam itself is not all bad, or Muslims are not all bad? What's the issue?
I think that Muslims aren't all bad.
Well, true. Of course not. There's many fine Muslims out there. I think they're wrong theologically, but if you look at the history of Islam, and you look at the example of Muhammad, what Osama bin Laden and ISIS are doing is exactly Orthodox Islam. And I know you're not supposed to say that in America, but I just did. That's just the truth. I mean, if you follow Muhammad, Muhammad personally executed 700 male Jewish captors, or had them executed. Muhammad said, kill any Jew that comes into your power. So if you follow the Quran, and you only need to read surahs 8 and 9, that's the two of the chapters in the Quran, you can see it'll say, strike the heads off the infidel, may Allah destroy the Christians and the Jews. I mean, it's a very violent religion, and it has been a violent religion for 1,400 years. This did not start on 9/11. This has been going on forever. In fact, Thomas Jefferson had to deal with the Barbary pirates, the theme of the Marine Corps hymn, from the shores of Tripoli, right? From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. What's that? That's Jefferson sending the Marines into Tripoli. So this has been going on for a long time, and we do nobody any favors by being politically correct about it. We just got to tell people the truth. Now, again, you also have to say that not all Muslims believe that, thankfully, but a significant minority do. Oh, yes, over here.
Hi.
Hey. Go ahead.
My
Yeah.
question is concerning the teleological
Mhm.
and the cosmological arguments that you talked about.
Sure.
I remember you said that you talked about the unmoved mover.
Yeah.
And that it has to be, philosophically, it has to be spaceless, timeless, transcendent, and personal. And I'm not sure if personal is, I mean, I can understand spaceless, timeless, transcendent, and all that, but I don't see how personal is a necessary quality philosophically for the cosmological argument.
Okay, let me just deal with that first.
Can I explain a little bit? There's more to the question.
Okay, go ahead.
And for the teleological argument, you mentioned that, well, before when you were talking about about how God doesn't change. Now this is a different. You're making a different point, but you said that God doesn't change because a change necessitates what was it?
A move from perfection to imperfection. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So going off of that, according to the teleological argument, in the beginning, according to Christian theology, God was the only thing in existence, and so after God acted, that created a change. That was when he acted and he created the universe. That was a change.
It's not a change in him.
But it was a change in the state of existence. And wouldn't it have made the state of existence less perfect than it was when he was the only being in existence?
No, but it's not a change to his nature to create. That's an extrinsic, easy for me to say, extrinsic change. He's changing creation. He's not changing himself.
Well, yeah, but I was referring to the state of existence, not to God's own nature. But I was using the example that you gave when you were talking about God's nature. But I'm talking about the state of existence. Wasn't the state of existence perfect when God was the only thing?
Well, you have to have something that you're talking. You have to have an object of perfection. God remains perfect even if He creates a creation which isn't what we would call perfect. He personally remains perfect. His nature hasn't changed. He's created something extrinsic to Himself. So that's not a change in God's nature.
But I'm just talking about the state of existence itself, just the overall state of existence.
But that's fine. God can do that, and He can allow evil to come in. It does not change Him. The argument was that God's nature doesn't change, not that things that God creates don't change, because they do. So the issue is, does God's nature change? Now, going back to your question about the cosmological argument, in order to go from a state of nothingness to a new state of being, someone had to make a choice. And impersonal forces don't make those choices. And there were no impersonal forces. I mean, Stephen Hawking, on page 181 of his book, The Grand Design, says this: because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. To which John Lennox, who teaches at Oxford University, said that, he put it this way, he said, things said by brilliant scientists are still nonsense when they're stated that way, because that's nonsense. First of all, there was no law like gravity because there was nothing other than God. And secondly, even if gravity existed, it can't choose to do something different. It can't choose to create something. It can just do what it's already been established to do. So, in other words, gravity is not a creative force. Gravity just does the same thing over and over again. It can't create something new.
But my point, and I didn't make this clear before, the connection between those two questions is the personal aspect of it, of a personal being has to have a reason to do things. So that's part of the teleological argument, is that there always has to be a reason. And I think that reason derives from a discontentment with the present situation.
Oh, no. No.
Situation.
You might create or you might do something out of love, not because of discontentment. You might love somebody and want to do something nice for them. You're not discontented. You love, and so you do something like that. It's not that you're going from a state of lack to a state of or a better state. You're just wanting to do something because you love somebody. Now, God creates the universe. He didn't have to create the universe. He didn't have to create us. But a loving being decided to create the universe to share his love. He is a loving being, and that's what loving beings do. They share love.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. But the thing is, when you're
Is your name Stephen? Let's talk later because we're running out of time here. I'll stay later, and we'll go to because we can talk a lot longer. But I want to get some other questions in here, but they're good questions. Is that okay? All right, good. In the back, there's people, and is there people over here too somewhere? Okay, there's a lady right down here. Yes, go ahead.
Why do
I'll need a little bit more than that.
Why do religions become so violent?
Why do religions become so violent? Well, because religions are often made up by people, and people are bent toward evil. But, you know, have you ever heard this idea that religion is the cause of all wars? Have you heard this? You know what the truth of that is, actually? If you go look at the Encyclopedia of War, only 7% of wars have been caused by religion. If you take Islam out, you're down to 3%. I mean, let's just think of the 20th century. World War I, caused by religion? No. World War II, caused by religion? No. Korean War, caused by religion? No. Vietnam War, caused by religion? No. Maybe you could make an argument about the Gulf War, but actually Saddam Hussein was an atheist, right? You keep looking at all the wars just in our lifetimes. They're not caused by religion at all. But the question is, why do some religions cause violence? Because some of them have it in their doctrine, like Islam. So Islam has it written right into the Quran, the life of Muhammad, and the history of Islam. But Christianity has violence in it against the commands of Jesus, not in line with the commands of Jesus. That's why when people say, well, you know, what was did in the Inquisition, Christians did that. Yeah, but they did it against the teachings of Christ, not in accord with the teachings of Christ. And you see, more people have been killed in the name of atheism than in any religion, certainly. In fact, if you look at the last century, up to 100 million people were killed by atheistic regimes, and none of those regimes were led by Hitler. Who are they? Mao, Stalin, Lenin, Pol Pot. None of them, or even Hitler. You had Hitler in there who claimed to have some sort of religious view, but it certainly wasn't Christianity. I don't think Hitler was worshiping a Jew, do you? So far more have been killed in the name of atheism than Christianity or any religion. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Where are we? Down here?
My question is, why are ISIS doing this, and are they atheists themselves?
Say that again? Why or what?
Why is ISIS doing this, and are they atheists?
Are ISIS atheists? Well, no. ISIS, you mean? The Islamic State?
Yes.
Is that the question? No, they claim to be following the Quran and the teachings of Muhammad. And they have justification for that by reading Surah 8 and Surah 9 and looking at the life of Muhammad, because Muhammad did much of what they're claiming to do. So, no, they're not atheists. They claim to be Muslims who believe in Allah, who is a theistic God, but a God that is one. He has no partners. In fact, it's a great sin in Islam to put partners with God. That's why they think the Trinity is so blasphemous. No, they're not atheists. There was a lady up here, too, somewhere up here. Yes, this lady in the blue. Yes, sir, go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, it seems in most of our Christian experience, and I won't say how old I am, one of the things that strikes me is that much of what you're teaching in the way of apologetics, 1 Peter 3:15, talking about being able to give a reason, a defense for the hope that we have within us, has not been taught.
Mm-hmm.
We've been taught, it appears, what to believe, but it's only seems very recently that there's been an emphasis on being able to demonstrate, prove, and explain why to believe it
Mm-hmm.
to an unbelieving world.
Mm.
I'd just like you to comment on what has happened over the last maybe 30 years regarding this, and how do we, implement apologetics, from our youth up into those of us who are adults, so that we can, deal with what's going on in the world in terms of secular thinking and the hostility that we're experiencing more towards Christianity.
Yeah, excellent question. In fact, Alexis de Tocqueville, who toured the country in the 1830s, said that Christianity was just assumed to be true and nobody had any pushback on it. So we just got lazy because we never had anybody who was fighting us on it. And it's only been, as you say, maybe the past 30, 40 years where Christian apologetics has become more prominent. And the reason for that is because there are more people out there with questions now and more people actually out there with hostility toward Christianity. But if we had been following what the scriptures have said from the beginning, I mean, apologetics was big back in Augustine's day, right? He's going against the Manichaeans. And it was big in Aquinas' day. He writes a whole book refuting Islam. So throughout the history of the church, there has been apologetics. It's only been in our recent centuries here that we haven't seen much of this. Now, I think what we need to do is what you said. We need to start with young people, very young, teaching them the truth. And in fact, here's one thing you can do with your kids. You can play Spot the Lie. Say you're watching TV and you see something on TV you know is a lie. You put the thing on pause and you go, okay, what's the lie here? You don't have to break out your Bible and make it a Bible study. But you can talk about things like that. For example, 94% of all sex on TV is outside of marriage, and there's never any consequences, right? Nobody ever gets hurt. There's never a disease. There's never a problem. Everything's always great. Spot the lie, kids. What's the lie? Is this the way the world really works? No. It's not the way the world really. So do that. There are some books that are being written for kids in fact, my friend J. Warner Wallace is writing a couple right now for kids in apologetics. If you go to our website, crossexamine.org, you can find some resources there. So start kids young in this material. In fact, our stuff goes all the way down to junior high. Why I still don't have enough faith to be an atheist DVD set, junior high kids can get it. There's workbooks that come with it and everything. So start as young as possible. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What do you do with not the real blatant religions like Islam? Mm-hmm. Other religions here that use morality, that claim to know God, or, the universal God. How do you speak to them? Okay, because when they don't claim to be atheists. They don't claim not to believe in God, and they're not out shooting people. Okay, they're out helping people. They're running drug rehabs. They're doing moral things. They believe they're following moral laws. They don't believe in Christ. They don't.
Can you give me an example of what would you say?
Let's say universalists, Christian Scientists.
Okay, good.
Scientologists.
All right. Okay. Well, again, when somebody says something, it's not your job to refute what they say. It's their job to support what they say. So what I ask of somebody like a universalist, you can hold on to that if you want. A universalist is, well, what do you mean by universalist? And how did you come to that conclusion? Why do you think it's true? And if they don't believe Christ rose from the dead, my question is, well, who was Jesus Christ then? Who was he? And what evidence do you have for that position? I mean, you'd have to discount the resurrection, and you'd have to discount the birth of the church, because the only way a church is going to grow out of Judaism is if there's a miracle like that, and there was. That's why we have a church. So, again, most people are not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. And so you got to ask them the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Because people can feel real good about themselves by doing good things. In fact, I get questions on campuses sometimes where they'll say, well, something like, well, I'm a good person. My first question is, first of all, what do you mean by good? Right? Secondly, why do you think being a good person is the purpose of life? Where does that come from? Thirdly, who is this being that establishes what good is? And fourthly, are you really good, or have you ever done anything evil? If you have, you're not really a good person. So how are you going to pay for those moral crimes? Who's going to do that for you? Yes, sir, you had a question?
I don't.
Go ahead.
Tony. I'm just curious, can you explain neutrality from a presupposition standpoint?
Neutrality in what sense? What do you mean?
Just state, like, there is no neutral, like, just from a presupposition, how to just stay firm in the word.
Well, you'd have to give me an example. Like
me, I presuppose God all the time, so
Uh-huh.
I've had people that I'll be talking to somebody evangelizing, and I already know that my God's the only God there is.
Uh-huh.
So, I'll have a friend come by and say, well, they believe in God, they just don't believe in Jesus. To me, when I have that question come about, I go, please don't talk. Because the bottom line is, when you tell me that, you're saying they believe in God, they just don't believe in God. Which kind of is a self-refuting argument, because our God is Jesus Christ. So
right, but that may be an error in evidence or an error in thinking. Because there are other theisms out there, like Islam and Judaism. And even the Bible says everybody knows there's a creator God, but that doesn't mean you know who Jesus is. Everybody, if there's a creation, there must be a creator. If there's a moral law, there must be a moral lawgiver. Everybody knows that. In fact, God has written 2 books, not just the Bible. What's the other book? The book of nature. And you know that there's a God from the book of nature, from creation and conscience. Now, you don't know that Jesus exists because of this, but you do know that there's a creator God. So many people believe in God already. They just don't believe in Jesus because either they've never heard of him or they haven't investigated him enough. Mm-hmm. All right, we just got a couple more minutes before we have to go. I know we had someone else. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Okay, so if we believe that Christianity as a whole is true, why do we have to claim that we're Baptist or Catholic or stuff like that?
Gee, we've about run out of time. There was a guy this morning who said that there's only 2,900 Baptists in Czechoslovakia. Do you remember? I think that was the first service. He said that. And he said there are more people on the rolls here in this church than there are Baptists in Czechoslovakia. Think about that. Well, I can tell you, friends, I have not seen 2,900 people here today. Do you know, according to the church rolls, there are more Baptists in Florida than there are people? Did you know that? Okay. Denominations. It's really a question about denominations, right? And there's so many different ways we can go with this. People who believe in the Bible and believe in the essentials of the faith have varying denominations, but they're not big issues. Like, for example, mode of baptism, liturgy, or more of a freestyle worship. These are things that maybe a different denomination will have for people who believe the Bible, right? There are denominations out there that don't really believe the Bible, don't even believe in God. Like some of the mainline denominations, they're like no better than hymn-singing Rotary clubs, okay? But if you're talking about the denominations that believe in God, my point is here is we agree on the essentials and we disagree over secondary or even tertiary issues, and there's no reason to divide over that, okay? In fact, that's even true among Protestants and Catholics. Stay with me on this, because many people think Catholics, they're the Antichrist or something. Conservative Protestants have more in common with conservative Catholics than conservative Protestants have in common with liberal Protestants. Because conservative Catholics and conservative Protestants agree on all the essentials. There is a God, you are not him. Jesus is God, he came, he atoned for our sins. He's going to come again, the substitutionary atonement. He's going to come again and reign. We all agree on all this. And in fact, a lot of people will come to me and they'll say, do you think Catholics can be saved? And I say, I even think some Baptists can be saved. Because it's not where you go to church as to whether or not you get saved. How you get saved is what Paul says in Romans chapter 10, that if you believe Jesus has risen from the dead, not just believe that, but believe in, as we talked about this morning. If you trust that Jesus has risen from the dead and confess with your mouth he has, then you'll be saved. That's it. Now, you can go to any church you want. It might not be wise to go to some churches, but you can go to any church you want. If you believe that, you're saved. Okay? So, again, what we agree on is a lot more succinct or a lot more important than what we disagree on among churches that believe in the Bible. And if you want a good book on this, that's a classic, it's called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. He gave that book before he published it to Roman Catholics, to Protestants, Methodist, all around, and said, here's what we all agree on. These are the essentials of the faith. Okay? Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. It might strike you as confusing at first, so bear with me. You said that there has to be morals for things to be immoral.
Right.
So do you also believe that there has to be negatives for there to be positives and things like that? So, how do you feel about the power of positive thinking? Like you said, being a Christian is hard. So, in hard times, do you believe in the power of positive thinking, or do you believe that...
The question is, what do you mean by the power of positive thinking? That if you think good things are going to happen? Like you have a force that you can change things with your thinking? Is that what you mean?
Well, yeah, kind of. Or just like being...
No, be precise. Yes or no.
Okay.
Can you, with thinking, change external reality?
No.
Okay, good.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if by being happy with the things you do have in your life, do you believe that affects who you are as a person?
Oh, of course. Paul talks about that. I've learned to become content in all things. Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, it's good to be positive. But it's also good to be realistic, right? You don't want to be a pessimist. You don't want to be a negative person all the time. So, yeah, it's good to be positive, but I think the Scriptures teach. In fact, just read the Proverbs. If you read the Proverbs, you'll see that you're going to get a lot further being positive than you are being negative. But that doesn't mean ignoring what's true. In fact, Jeremiah, of course, says in Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So we have to keep a good, what I mean by good, we have to keep an accurate view of ourselves and human nature. And when we're going through life, we shouldn't trust ourselves completely, nor should we trust others completely, because we know we have a sin nature, so we have to hold one another accountable. That's part of the reason there's a church, by the way. We have to hold one another accountable. There was another question, wasn't there? Did you say?
We're going to wait for the Fellowship Hall.
Fellowship Hall.
Yeah.
Okay, roger that. Fellowship Hall, let's go.
Guys.
Thanks, folks.
That's a smart man right there, y'all. Can y'all think